guys, it's me, Halloween Dan, and welcome to another prop review kind of video. But it's not just any props. Once again, and somewhat crazily, we are today focusing on some props that are coming to the UK.
We call these things chips. Instead of crispity, crunchy, munchy, crackerjack, snacker, nibbler, snap and crack, pop, Westerpool, Chester, Shire, Queen's lovely jubbly delights. That's rather a bit cringe, innit, bro?
Through one form or another. The main batch I want to talk about is like a second release of things we are going to be seeing coming to the range, which is pretty big deal for us UK haunters. But the second thing I want to talk about just briefly are some pretty cool things that are supposedly coming to the UK because of PALMER agencies. And I think you guys are going to like them. So let's do this. So starting with the range, we've already seen a whole vast array of things that were released back in January, which is still a pretty crazy thing to say. We are only in February. It's very unusual that we here in the UK see almost anything released this early of any description. So seeing anything is kind of a big deal. If you haven't seen that video, I will just reiterate, I have a slight love-hate relationship with the range only because it tends to stock an awful lot of Sunstar. And Sunstar is... well, it is what it is. I'm not going to be bash it or anything. I'm not going to be negative towards it. But it isn't exactly high-end stuff here. You know, it's all right. It fills your haunt. It does its job. But it's not high-end quality stuff here. We're just talking about pretty basic things. But so far, at least, some of the things we've seen released have actually quite surprised me. We've had a few things that have actually looked pretty good. The quality doesn't look too bad at all. And they actually look pretty substantial, which is a massively bonusified thing. The second batch of things I want to briefly talk about that we will see coming to the range is, I want to say, even within the range, this is like their lower end items. These are cheaper items that do not something you're going to build your haunt around, really, I would say. But some of them, even though they're at the cheaper end of the scale, are surprisingly good.
Not great, not terrible.
These props were shared to me by my good friend Harry J Vlogs once again, and also Halloween Dude on our Discord, our Halloween Haunters Discord, was also instrumental in making sure I saw these pictures. So thank you to you both. Big shout out. Go and follow them if you get a chance. So we're going to start off with the two most expensive things, and they're the things that I saw the earliest. I actually saw these things the day my last video went out. The first thing is the Halloween Clown Stack. Now, I have already briefly talked about these in my Costco video only last week. They're actually okay. They're clearly a complete rip-off of the Home Depot stack of clowns, trio of clowns that Home Depot brought out last year. Even some of the colours of the clowns are vaguely similar. And it does look a little bit like they've just had these three smaller clowns and they've kind of gone, oh, let's bung them together and we can recreate this thing. And what I don't know about these clowns is whether they break apart and you can have them as individual standing clowns. Something about the way they're stacked says that maybe at least one of them does detach somehow, possibly the one on the top, but I'm not really sure. Either way, they're okay. If you like clowns, you might like these. They look relatively substantial and they only are about £50. My guess is they'll each have some very basic arm movement, maybe a tiny bit of head movement, and they'll have red glowing eyes is my guess. But these are clearly not for me because I'm still not into clowns. I'm not being negative about clowns, but I'm still not really into clowns. On a similar theme, and I think there's a few people who are surprisingly excited by this, but I don't know why they are, and that is Haunted Ticket Booth. Now, this is clearly a prop designed to go into a carnival-like theme, and it looks questionable. And especially at that price, it's £100. It's $99.99. It looks very similar in construction to what we saw last year. We had the Haunted Coffin. And last year I was actually quite impressed with the Haunted Coffin. It had a hand that kind of jiggled out and it had some eyes that lit up and it did some moaning noises. I think it was £90, not $100. But then when I saw it in reality, I was rather let down because it was just a foam facade on a piece of cardboard about this thick. It was not three-dimensional, or at least not much of a three-dimension. And it was, for the money, I thought it's far too much money for something really quite simplistic and basic. This has that kind of vibe to it. It looks as though there's some kind of a Reaper of some description or a skeleton inside of the booth. I'm not sure whether that is a three-dimensional thing or just a picture. From this, you can barely tell. I hope it does. It would be really cool if it moved, of course, that skull, if it kind of floated about. Or if it was, I don't know what that is, some sort of a hologram perhaps, that would be really cool. If you've got carnival type horn, this would look pretty good in it at the entrance perhaps, but then it hasn't got any light up features or anything. The lights that are on the top of the stand that say tickets, they're just a picture. It's all pretty basic, and unless it does something really fantastical, that £100 price tag, at least as far as I'm concerned, is way off the money. Then we move into the much cheaper end props, and we've got another prop that's called the Spirit of Halloween. Now, we had one released earlier on in the year, which was a slightly more substantial skeletal kind of reapery, scarecrowy character. Still pretty basic, but more substantial than this. This is just a really basic hanging character that looks very much like a scarecrow. Again, I'm guessing it's got a bit of arm movement and it probably says a couple of phrases. Its eyes glowing red. It's a very basic end hanging prop, but for $17.99, it's probably not too bad of an investment. Similar vibe, we've got this spooky hanging girl in red. Same kind of thing. You've got this creepy looking doll face. They do love to go down this creepy girl, creepy doll face. Someone mentioned in the comments of my last video when I talked about the ranges, why are the arms always so short? They are always weirdly out of proportion. I don't really know why. It's the same with this. She's kind of hunched over with tiny little arms. Tiny little arms.
Your arms are just too short to box with God.
And yeah, I don't really know why that is. But there you go. At least she's got feet. She's a hanging prop with feet. I don't actually know any of the dimensions here. She probably looks like she's about 5 foot in total. Again, she's probably got to say some creepy phrases, movement of the arms, glowing red eyes, and she's £20. Slightly more substantial hanging prop that we've got is this creepy animated witch. Now, I like the look of this witch. I think she's pretty cool. She's a classic black outfit, green-faced witch, creepy-looking hands. She's definitely going to have moving eyes. That's what the eyes are about. It says multicolour. I've got a skull on top of a sign that has moving eyes. I got it a couple of years ago from the range, and this looks as though it's got the exact same movement. I'd prefer it if perhaps this had some witch phrases with it, and if the mouth moved, that would be phenomenal, but I'm not going to get my hopes up for that. It probably has some really strange generic phrases, and it'll do this moving of the eyes. It possibly is only doing the moving of the eyes to music, which is even more weird. But there you go. It's still relatively substantial, and it's $29.99, so we're not breaking the bank here. One of the more interesting hanging props that we've seen come out of the range in the last few days is the double-headed Reaper. Now, I've never seen anything quite like this. It, again, is on the more basic end of the scale, and it's only a hanging prop, but it's this Reaper that for whatever reason, they've decided to stick a second head on. So it's kind of like a conjoined Reaper. I don't know what that is, like a conjoined twin Reaper. I'm not really sure why that needs to be a thing, but it's different and it's relatively cool. He would look pretty good in my haunt, to be honest with you. It's definitely different. I'm not sure if one of them has some mouth movement and the other one is completely static, or whether they're both static but posable. I'm not really fully sure. For £20, which is what this is costing, I'm not expecting the world from it. It's got green glowing eyes, so that's different, at least from red. And yeah, it looks okay.
It's okay!
Probably my favourite of the bunch, just because of the character that it's portraying, is the hanging vampire. So this is actually, at least in some of these pictures, this is actually looks relatively substantial. It is only a hanging prop, so it hasn't got any feet, but it has this quite creepy head sculpt. It's really quite dark and sinister looking vampire prop. It's clearly based upon some version of Nosferatu with that very white pale skin and the bald head, and it's a very aggressive looking vampire. It's got quite good hand sculpt. The outfit isn't completely terrible, but every time I ever get excited about these props, when I see them in reality, they're actually really small. Like, they're very scaled down. The size of the head is, whereas you want it to be a proper head size, it's usually about half the size of what you would imagine it to be. So I'm not getting my hopes up overly for how good this is going to be. But initially, for $19.99, this is a not too bad looking vampire prop, and it would look okay in the background of my haunt, certainly around my castle. So all in all, those props from the range are not too bad. there's a few questionable ones there, but actually, so far so good for the range. This is actually a quite impressive year as the range goes. So I'm pretty impressed so far. But now onto something that I just sort of happened across the other day on Facebook, where somebody shared some information about something that Palmer Agencies is bringing into the UK for 2025. Now, Palmer Agencies is a wholesaler. It buys things in and sells them to other companies. So a lot of the time, the things we see from Palmer Agencies end up on sites like Mad About Horror or even the Halloween store. All the online sellers tend to buy a lot of their things from what Palmer Agencies buy into the country. So we always kind of sit here with fingers crossed that Palmer Agencies do bring some sort of impressive things to the UK. And at least to begin with, this looks positive. On Facebook the other day, I saw this. 2 new groundbreaker props that Palmer Agencies will be bringing into the UK. They've at least been listed in their catalogue, and hopefully they'll appear somewhere. These are clearly coming off the back of the success of the Party City Rattles groundbreaker, which has been replicated by a million different places now, including Costco, and that came to Costco UK last year and was very well received. So it seems that many of these companies have picked up on this as a thing and realised that this is really quite a popular idea.
Popular. I know about popular.
And so now even the UK is starting to see a whole batch of slightly different ones. Now, straight off the bat, I'm going to say that these are nowhere near as good as Rattles and the Costco version of Rattles, but they're good in their own way. So we start off with this skeleton groundbreaker, of course, and it's all right. It's a 4-foot standing thing. It's breaking out the ground by 4 foot, so it's pretty substantial, and it's a very generic looking skeleton, to be quite honest with you. The proportions are nowhere near as big as Rattles or the Costco version of Rattles. The head sculpt in its own right, though it's a good one, doesn't look as big as that particular groundbreaker. And even like the rib cage and everything, I'd say the rib cage looked a little bit out of proportion to the head. It could have done with being a bit bigger and a bit bulkier. But in saying that, what I do like about this skeleton is that it's much more poseable than the Costco version of Rattles. You can actually pose the arms. We've got 3 pictures here, each one showing the arms in slightly different positions. It seems to have the ability to reach out or reach up, so it's obviously got some strength in those arms. So the fact that you can pose this thing in a much more elaborate way than it just sort of leaning on its side like Rattles does, that in its own right is a big bonus for this thing, and that could make this thing quite popular. But out of the 2 groundbreakers that are now apparently going to make themselves available, my favourite is the second one that I've seen a picture of, which is the pumpkin groundbreaker. Now, just very similar to what Party City did last year, they brought out last year the pumpkin version of Rattles last year, which was a shrunk down version. Once again, this is a 4-foot prop, so it's not absolutely enormous, but nor is it particularly tiny. But I much prefer this one to the skeleton version because it just has a lot more detail in it. The head sculpt of the pumpkin is very impressive. I really like the way that it looks. And because it's a pumpkin head, that body doesn't look as out of proportion, because whenever you put a pumpkin head on top of any character, the pumpkin always makes the head look a lot bigger than it should be anyway. So the fact that the rib cage and the arms are slightly smaller than the head, it kind of doesn't matter with this one as much because the pumpkin is supposed to look big. Rather than it just being plain white bones, we've also got this slightly orange and black hue to this one. I like the shading and the detail on it. And it does look as though the head lights up. So that in its own right could definitely make this one stand apart compared to the skeleton version. But I don't know, each to their own. I like classic skeletons. I also like pumpkin props. So either one of these are pretty good. And from the rumour is at least that these will be in the sort of market of between £200 to £225. So not too crazy a price and relatively impressive. I would definitely consider probably the pumpkin version, in honesty. But that's it. That's all for today. Hopefully we'll see more very soon. It's exciting nevertheless because these things are actually coming to the UK, or hopefully are coming to the UK. Whether you think these things are impressive or not, it doesn't really matter because we've never seen things released quite this early for the UK market. Usually we're still hanging on well into May before we even get a taste of what might be coming to the UK. So this is quite exciting because maybe for the first time ever, the UK firms are thinking ahead and actually keeping pace with the market that exists. But I don't know, we'll have to stay patient and see what actually does come to the UK. Hopefully this is a sign that there is yet amazing things to come. But I'm not holding my breath. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching today and I will see you in the next one. Keep it spooky. Bye.